Hello and welcome. I'd like to call the meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority to order. It's Wednesday, May 9th. Before we get started, I'd like to start with a roll call, please.
Yes. Chair Corrigan?
Here.
Vice Chair Abikoga?
Here.
Director Grilly?
Here.
Director Tate? Here. Director Smith?
Here.
Director Miller?
Here.
Director Sinks?
Here.
Director Rennie?
Here.
Director Bruins?
Here.
Director Craig?
Here.
And joining us by teleconference is Director Gibbons. Are you present?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'll note that Director Harney and Director Cortese are absent.
Thank you very much. The first order of business is to allow public comment on any matter not on tonight's agenda. If there's anyone here from the public who would like to address us, please feel free to approach the podium now and make your comment. I'll be happy to entertain 2 minutes, more if you're desperate for an extra minute. Hearing none and seeing none, I'm going to move on to the consent calendar. Any issues that need to be pulled off the consent calendar, or can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar? And it's, okay, all in favor?
We will need to do a roll call.
Sorry.
Just because we have a teleconference in.
Thank you so much for the reminder. Sorry, Director Gibbons.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start the roll call vote. Director Grilly? Yes. Director Tate? Aye. Director Smith? Aye. Director Miller? Aye. Director Sinks? Aye. Director Rennie? Aye. Chair Corrigan?
Yes.
Vice Chair Abikoga? Director Bruins?
Aye.
Director Craig?
Aye.
And Director Gibbons?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. And the next item is the regular calendar to approve a pilot new interim rate option for large commercial customers who have currently opted out. Speaking on behalf will be the Account Services and Customer Relations Director, Don Bray.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, directors. As you know, we've had a few opt-outs among our top 100 commercial and industrial customers over this last year. It's a small number, 3 or 4 in total, but we'd love to get them back, and we have a real opportunity, especially now with our rates so competitive. One of the issues that's come up has been a concern about our interim rate option. In other words, if a customer opts out at some point, they have 2 options for a 6-month interim rate. They either pay us our rate for another 6 months before going back to PG&E's rate, or they pay what's called a transitional bundled service rate.
Excuse me, if we could please pull up the presentation. Thank you.
And the concern with that is this rate is always changing. It's very complicated. So what we're hearing from more than one large commercial customer is that if we could somehow provide more predictability in the unlikely event that at some point down the road they had to opt out, that would be worth something to them. So I mentioned the 2 options that exist right now. The transitional bundled rate, again, very, very complicated. It's actually a different rate than standard rates for each of the periods, peak, part peak, and off-peak. Right now, the peak rate and part peak rate are actually lower than PG&E, but the off-peak is much higher. And this rate changes literally week to week, and you get a different rate on your bill each month based on what's happened over the last 4 weeks. So quite complicated. The SVCE standard rate for that 6-month interim period is the other option, but presumably if a company opted out, the reason they did that was that your rate was less competitive than PG&E's, so they're not real excited about paying that rate, that high, presumably higher rate either. So we're looking at proposing a new interim rate option, and this would only apply to customers that have opted out for a year. And we're calling it the PG&E equalization rate, where we would continue to charge our SVCE rate for 6 months, but then credit or debit the customer at the end of 6 months based on whether our rate was higher or lower than what they would have paid with PG&E. So in other words, we're doing this such that they would pay the PG&E rate during that 6-month interim period. They would have to sign a special agreement to do this. It's a bilateral kind of thing. It may actually make money for us, or it might make money for them, depending on what happens. We have a couple of eye chart scenarios here, but this is kind of the worst case scenario for us, where PG&E's rate dips below ours and remains that way for 6 months. We would owe that difference, the shaded area, for that 6-month period. We could also have this scenario where perhaps our rate is higher, but just for a month or two, and then we lower our rate below PG&E. They would owe us they would actually owe us in this case for the net difference. Financial impact to this, I'm trying to understand exactly what this would mean from a benefit and exposure standpoint. Did this on the basis of bringing back $1 million in returning customer revenue, or increments of $1 million, if you want to think of it that way. Each $1 million we bring back nets us about $250,000 annually at our current operating margin. In a worst case scenario, down the road, let's say we saw our rates go 10% higher than PG&E. For that full 6-month period, our exposure in this case would be $75K per $1 million in opted out revenue for a company that was under this special agreement. So it's a pretty good bet for us. Obviously, there's a lot of value in bringing these folks back, which should cover that downstream exposure. So the recommendation is to authorize the CEO to develop and pilot a new interim rate option for large C&I accounts currently opted out for at least 1 year. The staff report does not have this opted out for 1 year element in it. I think it was just opted out period. So this would be a slight modification to what was in the staff report. Any questions?
Yes, Howard.
I know all of our customers love us, but what's the potential of a customer using this to game the system, sort of an arbitrage against us? They sign up with us, they go with us for like a month, and then PG&E reduces their rates before we reduce ours. So they immediately opt back out, so we have to make up the difference.
Well, they would have to have signed this agreement, so they would have had to have been opted out for a year already. This isn't something that just anybody can do.
Right.
So they'd have to be one of the very few companies that are in this opted out position to begin with. If they did join us and then opt out, first of all, they'd be missing the opportunity to save 6% on gen right now. Right? And then secondly, they'd have to wait for a year to come back to us at a minimum.
No, but like, let's say they knew PG&E was going to lower their rate next month, right? So we're 6% lower. So they take our 6% for the month, then PG&E lowers their rate, so then they opt out.
Well, we would probably lower our rates in response a month later, and then we'd be in this scenario here. So
Yeah.
there isn't a real opportunity to game this, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe they could game us for a couple months, but that's like,
They'd be net losers at the end of 6 months. if
yeah,
we
they would
lowered our
still
rates.
lose, yeah.
There's certainly mechanisms to prevent going back and forth and back and forth and back
Yeah,
and
the
forth.
year thing seems super great. It wasn't, like you noted, wasn't there. And that was my only question. It doesn't sound like it's gameable to like a real long-term advantage. They might be able to make a month of money off of us somehow, but it's not a systemic loophole. Thank you.
Director Gibbons, I'd like to check in with you before I come around the rest of the dais for questions. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine with the discussion, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Rod, and then Burton and Nancy.
I think to Howard's point, this is a rate adjustment, a rate plan or something. Is there any reason why when we consider when we consider our next rate adjustment, I'm assuming this policy could also be part of that discussion via the, making sure that Howard's concerns are met. Is that fair?
Yes, again, this will only apply to customers that have signed up for it. It's a pilot program. We're only going to run it through the end of this year.
Oh, I see. So, Okay.
Yeah.
So we might decide we wanted to continue it, but then
Right.
again, it just may not be terribly relevant.
Right. I think maybe to address your question, it would induce us, I think, to be responsive in the event of rate changes.
Okay.
Which I think we would probably be anyway, but,
And there's nothing about what we would do here that isn't subject to some change in the future, should we get into gaming?
no.
Okay, thank you.
And Burton?
Does PG&E have a habit of just lowering rates, or are they kind of constrained to only change their rates at specific times during the year?
So PG&E typically makes a significant rate change once a year as of January 1st. As we all know, this year it extended to March 1st. But it's typically January 1st. There can be small rate changes throughout the year. We haven't seen many of those kinds of rate changes since we've become an operating agency, but I understand historically there have occasionally been rate changes that occur at some point during the year. So it's something we always have to keep an eye on. With our 6% difference right now, we're a little bit insulated, but at 1% it was a much bigger concern because it wouldn't have taken a very big change to have us become more expensive for a certain rate.
Okay, and is this based on any other CCA's method? And if so, do we have any data on how well it's performed for them? Like has PG&E seen something happening and then they just kind of swoop in and try to undercut it before something happens?
I'm not aware of other CCAs doing this. Many of the other CCAs, or at least the ones that were in place historically, MC and SCP, didn't have commercial sectors nearly as large as we do. So perhaps they hadn't really seen this issue. We've certainly had interest from MBCP in this, in maybe doing something like this for their customers. But other than that, I'm not aware of a lot of other experience with it.
Okay, thank you.
And Nancy?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering, what is the rate variability do we have any historic data about how much these rates have varied month to month or however they're billed?
They can vary quite a bit, literally week to week or month to month. I think if you were to try to plot a general arc, the transitional bundled rate has been a little bit more competitive all in. If you look across all of the three time of use periods, peak, part peak, off peak, than perhaps PG&E's standard rate. But it's just a function of what's going on in the market as of that week. And that's one of the reasons that commercial customers aren't very excited about this, is that it's just not something they can plan around.
So you're comfortable with the level of exposure, if assuming that we would owe?
Well, we don't have any exposure to PG&E's transitional bundled rate under this. The only thing we're exposed to is the difference between PG&E's standard rate, which should be pretty static over a 6-month period, and our rate.
So it's the delta, and the delta is within, you're bringing this forward so you feel it would be within parameters that the agency can handle.
And predict, and that the customer can understand and predict. So the customer is basically, they're hedging themselves to PG&E's rate, and we're doing the same thing, saying, yeah, we'll keep you whole relative to PG&E's rate for that 6 months. And it's a lot easier comparing our rate and PG&E's rate than it is our rate and the transitional bundled service rate, which is a hairball. So that's why we're
And
doing it
we're
this way.
further limiting our exposure, such as it is, by limiting it to just a very relatively small time window. So it's okay. All right, I'm satisfied, thank you.
If I could, please make sure the minutes will reflect that Director Harney has arrived, and let Director Gibbons know that Director Harney has now joined us. She's joining us by phone tonight. Yes. Sorry. She's wearing her invisible cloak tonight.
I didn't know I reported to her anymore.
All right. Are there any other questions? So are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment on this topic? Hearing none and seeing none, I'm going to bring it back up here for further discussion and perhaps a motion.
So I'd be happy to, Chair. First of all, I wanted to make a couple of comments. One is I really appreciate staff trying to be innovative about how to deal with this. You know, I think this board has expressed concerns and making sure we try to understand what does it take to get some of these larger commercial customers to come in. And it would have been easy to just say, well, yeah, glad you're concerned, but we're just moving along, right? Instead, you guys went and rolled up your sleeves, came up with an innovative plan here. What I really appreciate is the fact that you're proposing it as a pilot. So even though we heard some comments up here in terms of some concerns on exposures and all, I think by doing it as a pilot, it gives us an opportunity to enter into an agreement with any customer who might be interested in doing this as a pilot. It doesn't commit us any longer than it needs to, and I'm sure and I'm confident that staff will structure this agreement in a way to minimize our exposure as well. And whether that means limiting, how many people can take advantage of this pilot or what have you. So I'm confident and appreciative of what staff has come up with, so I would like to move staff's recommendation to have the board authorize the CEO to develop, remember the word is develop, and pilot a new interim rate option for large commercial customers who have currently opted out.
For over 1 year. I think that language needs to be in there, correct? That for over 1 year.
Opted out for over 1 year, yes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
May I offer a minor addition?
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should authorize our CEO to not sign any agreement that he feels might not be in the best interest of the organization. Right? If somebody's coming in and out, or if there's some sort of situation with the rate structure, I don't want it to be a program which is automatic. Since it's a special program, we should make sure he has discretion if something's not right to not sign.
Okay, so if we can add that in terms of that the selection of customers who can participate is at our discretion. So it's not everybody who wants to do it can do it. It's at our discretion. And the other one was
For 1 year.
and it's only eligible customers are those that have opted out for a year. And then probably the other qualifier on this is, do we have a duration on this pilot? Only goes till the end of this year in terms of people being eligible.
You can only sign up for it this year. It's a 5-year program, or the commitment.
So once you've signed up, you're in for 5 years.
Yes, you're in for 5. But again, the sign up has to occur. The pilot
Correct.
eligibility for the pilot ends at the end of this year.
Right.
So with those 3 additions to the motion that I read, is everyone any other ones? Who did the second? Do you accept those 3 amendments?
I want to ask a little clarification. So we're saying when a customer wants to go into this program, it's at that point the CEO would say, no, we're not going to accept you into this program, correct? It's not once the customer has gone into it and we decide and they opt out, then the CEO says, no, we're not going to, right?
I mean, my understanding, this is an agreement that we are entering into with a customer. So if I'm going to enter into an agreement during that period of discussion, I don't know if you want to call it negotiation, but during that period of discussion, we will understand what the terms are and we will say, yes, you qualify, or no, you don't. Okay. So no, it's not, we don't boot somebody.
Yeah, it wasn't my
out.
intent to kick anybody out. It was just to make sure that Gresh had discretion if something was super fishy, to not be forced to sign it by the direction that we gave. And he could come back to us and say, I've got one, but it seems fishy.
Okay.
I
And
just-
Director Gibbons, I want to check in with you, or do you have any comments or concerns you'd like to discuss now?
Thank you so much. Yes, please. I just wanted to clarify, the pilot program is to December of 2018, not a year. It's to the end of December 2018. Am I understanding the motion correctly?
Yes, that's what's been laid out here. The assumption was, and what should be in the staff report, is that this program would be in effect for customers, for eligible customers to sign up for it discretion of the CEO between now and the end of the year.
So Liz, it is the ability to sign up for this program or to enter into an agreement. I don't want to say sign up. The window for them to enter into an agreement with Silicon Valley Clean Energy expires on December 31st, 2018. Okay, so if you come to January 1, the program is not open to you. So the program closes December 31st.
Thank you, I thought that, I guess I confused with the addition to the motion about 1 year.
No, the 1 year was that one of the eligibility requirements is that the customer has had to have opted out for 1 year.
Okay, thank you for that.
I think Director Sinks has another comment.
Well, I have a little bit of a concern about this. If it sounds like we're being too dithering or, companies may not receive equal treatment, I'm just wondering if staff has any thoughts on, you're the ones in touch with these companies who are potential customers. Are we sounding perhaps biased or discriminatory if we add these things to the motion?
I think the additions sound good.
Okay.
And I think it's.
I mean, we
pretty
want to
tightly
be known as a fair dealer.
Right. I think it's pretty tightly constructed as it is.
Okay.
But were there some extenuating circumstances? Yeah, this should be at our discretion ultimately. If we feel comfortable offering it, then we should feel comfortable signing it. If someone came in with crazy circumstances and said, "Oh, hey, we know somebody else who has this deal, we want it," it could be at our discretion, I think.
If I may just add, I think the changes that have been proposed actually make the recommendation better.
Thank you. That was my only concern about it. I'll support it.
Any further discussion? I'd like to call for the vote, please.
Okay, Director Grilli? Yes. Director Tate? Aye. Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Miller?
Aye.
Director Sinks?
Aye.
Director Rennie?
Aye.
Chair Corrigan?
Yes, aye.
Vice Chair Abikoga? Aye. Director Harney?
Aye.
Director Bruins?
Aye.
Director Craig?
Aye.
And Director Gibbons?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously with all present.
Thank you. Item number 3, approve allocation of fiscal year 17-18 program funding for Bay Area Quality Management District Climate Protection Grant opportunity. Speaking on behalf of this will be Account Representative John Supp. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
While John's getting set, sorry to butt in here, but John has been promoted to Account Services Manager, and so congratulate him on that, and then next CEO report, I'll give you some more background.
Thank you very much. That was a most exciting and unexpected introduction. So, once again, it's my pleasure to address the board. It's been a few months, but I'm very excited to discuss this opportunity. Starting about 3 months ago, the working group for all the member cities, known affectionately as the MOG, the Member Agency Working Group, brought to our attention a grant opportunity with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The grant opportunity was for about $500,000, and it must be focused on existing buildings, and it must align with air district goals, things like energy efficiency, reducing carbon, reducing noxious gases, and so on. So in discussing this with the member agencies, they were quite positive about applying for a grant, and they were even more enthusiastic about utilizing that grant to address one of the more challenging aspects of decarbonization, which would be working in the residential marketplace on getting people to switch fuels from natural gas water heaters to electric heat pump water heaters. This is a great carbon savings opportunity, but it's very challenging to wean people off of natural gas for many, many reasons. So the MOG looked at this opportunity as one where we could look at SVCE funds and leverage in grant funds to make an effort to see if we can make some progress here. So what the MOG put together with our assistance was to create an initiative where a customer could get an electric heat pump water heater, plus the electrical installation work, plus a 200 amp service panel upgrade, and get all of that accomplished for the same cost as a natural gas water heater replacement. So where we've seen programs not succeed in the past is they fail to account for the true installation costs of electric heat pump water heaters. So granted, Palo Alto, Silicon Valley Power, and SMUD have all offered rebates on heat pumps. They've still left the customer holding the bag of a relatively expensive fuel switch opportunity. So by utilizing this grant money, along with some of our own money, we could do it in a way that could reasonably accomplish a couple of goals. One is to substantially increase the volume of heat pump water heaters done through these programs. The various programs that are in existence around the Bay Area have been operational for several years and have been accomplishing on the order of 5 or 10 projects per year per territory. So we would be looking at doing about 150 over a 2-year period. So what that does is that enables scale. It enables contractors to get excited and get interested and get motivated to move into this space. Something that can't really be done if we're limiting the pilot to 5 or 10 or 20 projects. Second is that it enables us to get a foothold in a number of homes. We're looking at a comprehensive energy electrification initiative for homes, and we're titling it Future Fit. So this would be Future Fit Home. And Future Fit Home would be inclusive of an electric heat pump water heater, a 200 amp service panel, and then later, outside of this grant opportunity, we would be looking at how to convert those homes to include electric vehicle charging, storage, induction cooking, heat pump furnaces, and so on. Because we know that in order for this to really be successful, we have to have a comprehensive vision, a comprehensive story, and a comprehensive plan for this to work. This is not really about heat pumps. This grant is about heat pumps, but our involvement is really bigger and broader than that. And of course, with input from the CPAG, input from the MOG, and of course the roadmap, we're working in September, we will be able to more fully flesh out that overall vision. But this grant was time limited. The application is due on May 11th. So again, in working with the member agencies, we came up with this particular proposal. So what we're asking here from the board is we recognize that this grant it's a potential. We don't know if we're going to get it, but what we do know is that if we demonstrate committed funding, then that makes the grant application that much more enticing. So we're asking for essentially a contingent approval. If we receive money from Bay Area Air Quality Management District, we ask that you pre-approve the ability for us to match that fund request. It's up to $500,000, so we'd be looking for a contingent approval for $500,000. And this money that we're asking for is already available in our 2017-2018 program budget. So this is not new money. This is money that we've already set aside, but we have not yet allocated. We're simply asking to allocate it this way. And finally, the program design itself is not done, right? We're not trying to shortcut a program design process. We have a great concept, we have a grant opportunity, and so we are looking to get that support from the board to maximize our opportunity of winning the grant. Subject to winning the grant, we would then do a full program design that would be inclusive of all the normal things we would have to go through for program design. So I just want to make sure this is not about the program itself. This is about how do we maximize our ability to leverage funding from external sources to help make our money go further and accomplish more. I think one last piece of this that is also, I think, very exciting is by being able to leverage money from outside sources, it allows us to go beyond things that we would normally want to do with our own ratepayer funds. When we have our own ratepayer funds only, we tend to get pressure to maximize carbon savings, possibly at the expense of longer-term vision. But by being able to leverage in external money, it gives us a little bit more freedom to say, maybe there's longer-term things we should be investing in. Data acquisition, more information about potential customers. Maybe there's infrastructure work. Maybe there's supply chain problems, right? By being able to leverage in money, we actually have the ability to sort of test out and pilot some additional areas like that. And I think finally, the part about working in this space that I think is excellent for Silicon Valley Clean Energy is that This is about an infrastructure work. This is about contractors, both plumbing and electrical, because this technology requires both. So it's going to be an infrastructural investment happening right here in our territory. So I think it also serves as a great story and a great way for us to launch into the arena of programs should this grant get awarded. So in conclusion, again, we're looking for that pre-approval of program funds contingent upon receipt of a money from BACMID. Any questions?
Anybody have questions for the Account Services Manager sub?
I'm just wondering, Margaret, if you know anybody at the Air District.
Okay.
You can use mine.
Excuse me?
That green one.
Do you know anybody at the Air
Corrigan.
District, Margaret,
There's a couple of folks
who sit on this board and that board
come
too?
across over over the last year or so.
Excuse me, Chair Corrigan. We just want to interrupt for a second, sorry.
Yes, so anyone is on the air quality board.
Oh, do we need to
I'd
recuse?
recommend to abstain tonight.
Okay.
In the event that you'd be voting on the matter, it gets to you before, so.
Yes, we would be.
I think we'll be recusing here.
At both ends, actually.
So all joking
Both
aside,
ends.
who are we talking about? Just the two of you?
I think
Just the
two.
two of us.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Are
Okay.
they required to leave the
Well,
dice?
on the,
I mean, we regularly do grants for institutions in all our cities, and we've been advised by legal counsel there that we have a right to do so.
well, and again, it's up to your legal counsel for the air quality
Okay.
board to make that decision.
Well, we will certainly ask. But
Yes.
we can recuse tonight, certainly.
I could have some questions, though.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, probably not.
Oh, can I not ask questions?
No.
Okay.
I think
all right.
maybe my
someone
practice
else
would
will
be to
ask the
just walk out in the
question.
hallway, right?
I think we're all on the same
No,
page here.
you don't have to, this is not a Political Reform Act issue, it's a
Oh.
Government Code Section 1090 problem, so you just have to not participate at all and not vote. But you
So
don't have to- you
no
don't have
more
to step out of the room.
questions, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think I get it. I just can't call on these two or allow them to
Precisely.
participate.
Right.
Thank you. So, are there any other questions?
Can I make a comment?
Yes. How about him, then you, if that's all right?
Okay, I'm a him, you're a you, okay.
I'm sorry. I'm vacillating between first names and director, all these names. I'm very sorry.
You're definitely not a him, so I think I'm first.
So you have sorted that down?
So mine is a little bit on a tangent. The Future Fit is the first time I saw that. I would recommend thinking about adding a box that said load shift on it to finish the picture, because you're adding all of those things but when you either load shift with a battery, for this future home with all of these things, or you load shift with appliances that you can set for when they do their thing, so it fits within our whole duck curve constraint thing. But I am supportive of the grant idea too.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Director Smith. Director Smith, please.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I applaud the MOG and staff for pulling this together, and I know that our staff is excited about the prospect of more programs and spending program monies to further the conservation of, the elimination of greenhouse gases. So congratulations on that. And I am very happy to pre-approve these funds. I wonder if we will need to come back later and accept them, so we'll have to vote on this twice, assuming that we get the funds. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So the expected grant award would happen in July. During that time, we would then have to do multiple things. One would be to actually look at the contract that they're putting in front of us, and the contract itself would have to be approved. And secondly would be designing the actual program itself and making sure the program itself both aligns with our needs and the Air District's needs. So there will be two sort of sets of approvals that would happen around that. I would agree with that.
Two additional sets of,
Yes.
okay.
I mean, again, perhaps I'm speaking out of order in terms of how programs will actually be approved, but at some point, the actual design will need to be approved either by staff or the board or both.
Okay, well, this is exciting, an exciting prospect. I'm glad to see this sort of thing coming forward. And I probably had another question that flew my mind, so I will cede the floor to somebody who has things on their mind. Unless anybody, well,
Director Grilly.
When you talk about approval of the programs, does that mean if the grant is approved and once the program is developed, you'd have to go back to Baymac and have it approved again?
Oh, great question. The approvals would all be happening here with SVCE staff and this board. So no, once we have agreement, once the grant is awarded, and assuming the contract around the grant meets our respective goals, the program itself will be a separate approval just with the SVCE board and with ourselves.
And then could you clarify, you said there'd be an additional, up to an additional 500,000 over the course of 2 years. Is that after this $1 million?
So the request is for 500,000.
Okay.
So the 500,000 from the Air District would be usable over a 2-year period. So there will only be $500,000 available from the Air District, and it is only eligible for a total of 2 years. The request for the other 500,000 would be utilizing our own program dollars.
Oh, all right, okay.
And that would make the 1 million.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this side? And then back to you, Dr. Smith. Thank you. Jeannie Bruin.
Do you remember your other question? Oh, you want
Oh, please, then go ahead. Sorry, I am so out of
No, it's
whack
okay.
here.
to, Nancy, go ahead.
yeah, my question is just, so by pre-approving, by approving the pre-approval, can you speak to whether you feel that that would strengthen our application?
So the answer is absolutely it will, and that information comes directly from the Air District. In the scoring criteria, it is noted that committed funds are weighted more heavily than non-committed funds or other sets of matching funds. The exact weight of that is not known. Oh, certainly not known by us.
Okay, well, Director Bruins, and then we'll get to you, Director Gibbons, if you're listening.
Okay, so really the action before us is having the board support our application by saying that we are willing to commit up to the same amount of money, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now, first question in terms of looking at what you're asking, I'm assuming it's a one for, is the Air District the one requiring a 1-for-1 match, or is that something staff is recommending we do a 1-for-1 match?
Yeah, so staff is recommending a 1-for-1 match. We are certainly, again, assuming that it meets our goals and meets all the approvals necessary by SVCE staff and board, we could go above the $500,000 of SVCE money. The reason why we would want to match some or more than that 500,000 is there are simply fixed costs associated with getting a program launched at all. So
I'm not questioning
Great.
I'm just wanting to understand where that requirement is. So my second question will hopefully make you believe what I just said. So again, I don't know when they do grants, whether it's all or nothing. So if we're asking for 500K, is it we either get 500K or we get zero, or whether they come back and say, okay, you're going to get 250K instead? Because I know there's a lot of grants that are done that way, right? So my question to you is, if they do not approve the full grant request and they're going to do a smaller grant request, is staff thinking that we would still want, because right now it says up to 500 and it says up to 500. So are you looking at saying, even if they don't give us the full 500, we would still want to put in 500 in this program? So let's say they said 250. Would you say we're putting in 250, or would you say we're putting in 500? What's staff's recommendation?
yeah, staff's recommendation would be to look at the amount of money offered by the Air District and then design around that opportunity and determine where we would need to, how much money we would have to invest from SVCE funds to make it a viable program. Again, there's so many potentialities in that. At 250,000, start to beg the question of how much you want it at all.
Okay, so just to be clear, so the motion is not going to be for us to approve matching what we get from the Air District. It really is, we want to go up to 500, kind of it's not a one, you're not looking for an actual one-to-one match necessarily. You want that flexibility to go up to 500K tonight. So let me do it this way. We get a grant for $200,000. What will we all have thought? Do we think that the motion tonight would have been, okay, all we're putting in is 200K? Or is the expectation that, no, what we're authorizing is we'll go up to 500K? Again, remember, we haven't designed the program, we haven't approved a program. So given that, are you really asking us to go up to 500K, almost independent of how much the grant money comes in at?
So the request would be actually just for the match at this time, because once we actually have an award, if any, then we would go back to the actual program design drawing board to figure out what we need to do. So we're not looking for a specific commitment to allow us to go to 500,000, even if they only offer us 200,000. Really, the need right now is to say to the Air District, we are absolutely have money. We are absolutely behind this opportunity. We certainly would prefer the 500,000, but no, we're not going to handcuff ourselves to a large amount of money if the Air District commits a small amount of money.
Okay, and again, we haven't designed any program, but so help me understand, if for this Future Fit program, how much is it going to, if I were to do this as a homeowner on my own, what you're doing with the grant money, how much would I be, what does this cost?
Yeah, so specifically to replace a natural gas water heater with installation and a 200 amp service panel, the expected cost for that is about $5,500 to $6,000 to do that.
Okay, and then are you looking at, in the program design, have you thought about, is this to offset that cost? Or,
yes.
So it's an offset, it's not to pay for it 100%?
It is definitely not. The MOG recommendations was to ensure that all participants, outside of the social equity or low, affordable income qualified portion of it, that all customers that are market rate customers would be paying approximately 20% of the total cost of this deal. So they would be contributing about $1,500. We would contribute about $4,000 to $4,500, depending, and that is a fairly reasonable split given how early the market is for heat pump water heaters.
Okay, and then will this program also include a low income portion of it then?
Yes, it does. Well, again, the proposed program does include an aspect for people who likely would not be a part of decarbonization efforts on their own. So yes, and as it is written in the grant right now, it's about a 20% carve out for people who are on the CARE or FARA rates already.
Okay.
But again, that's certainly subject to change and input as we see fit.
Okay, and then so it will be coming to the board if we get the grant, it will be coming to the board to accept that grant, right? Is that what I heard you say? And then the second board action separate from that then is once you've designed the program to have the design come back.
I want to be careful about presuming how this would happen, but I agree with you directionally that once an award comes back, that there is going to be a contract associated with that award, and this group would need to weigh in on that, assuming it was over $25,000 or whatever the number is.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to understand those two steps, because for me personally, if we don't have an opportunity to look at this before staff goes off and starts trying to design a program, okay, I would say that I would prefer that we look at this as up to 500K, so that way if they gave us less, I would rather staff come back with a program design saying, here's A and B. A is if we do a one-for-one match, this is all we can do. If we do it, take their money and add our 500K, this is what we could do, so that we can look at it. Because I know I'm comfortable with saying 500K. But again, not to guarantee it, but to give that flexibility so we can have a program that can be successful.
If I could, I'd like to check in with Director Gibbons.
Yep, I'm done.
Director Gibbons, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me better?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So my questions are similar. Perhaps I can summarize by saying, I believe we're asking the question, will the board support matching, applying for a back end grant and matching whatever sum is provided or awarded to SVCEA up
Yes, that is correct. And again, I want to make sure we understand the commitment is contingent upon an award of a grant. So no grant, there's no commitment. If there is a grant, even up to the 500,000, we still all reserve the right to reject that grant opportunity if it doesn't meet our needs.
Any other questions? Okay. I do have a member of the public who'd like to speak if there's no other questions. And then we'll bring it back up here for discussion and hopefully a motion to move forward. James Talia, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. James Talia, resident of Sunnyvale, chair of Carbon Free Silicon Valley. So I would like to express strong support for the staff's recommendation. It gets at one of the most largest GHG producers in the home, gets the fuel switching and electrification process started. And I think that's going to be very important. And also, in the context that is being developed, the vision of the future fit home is very important, because thinking about one thing at a time is less good than thinking about the whole package, because you need to plan ahead for electrification of everything. So the panel aspect of it is a strong nod to that, because you don't want to upgrade the heat pump water heater or upgrade the water heater and not be ready for something else. So it's important, and for that reason, and thinking in terms of bundling and packages, there's a lot that can be done with, say, going EV along with a heat pump water heater. Instead of it as a set, it's not costing you $5,000-$6,000. Your net savings over 15 years are actually $9,500 in the average home. We've done some calculations. So if you think in terms of packages, which this future fit home really starts to think about, you're not talking about costs where you've got to throw a lot of incentive dollars at it. You can take the savings that customers have from going EV or even going solar, using those savings to apply to the electrification of the other units in the home. So that future fit home is a very important aspect of the context of how you want to go about these programs. So it saves a lot of, your money will go further. Thank you.
I believe one of the directors has a question for you, if you would entertain a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Talia. The first thing that occurred to me, and I made the comment about the load shifting, and part of that was because you're talking about a 200 amp panel, and I'm starting to wonder if we're really putting all this electric on it, whether a 200 amp panel is enough. That's really the question. You know, I mentioned, okay, if we get smart appliances and they talk to each other and they don't turn on at the same time, maybe we're okay. But again, I didn't see that in this future fit vision. So my first thought was, gee, if we're starting to add, because I added my electric car charger, and then I thought about the air conditioner. If those two start going at the same time, then how much more can I add? And 200 amps starts to maybe be a worry. Yeah.
That's true, and so there's a project that Carbon Free Silicon Valley has been doing in conjunction with 350 Silicon Valley called Be Ready, Beneficial Electrification Readiness, to try to start to look at some of these things. That's where the number came of trying to bundle. But so one of the concepts we've been discussing is you either go big or go smart with panel upgrades. And so a 200 amp panel is reasonable if you go about it smartly. There are some technical challenges, as you're pointing out. So that's not determined, but the program design isn't done yet. So I would imagine that as part of the program development, that they'd be looking at that very question: is 200 amps enough? Or maybe it's up to that point, but we want to make sure that we're advising people to get a proper assessment of the home for everything in electrification readiness, and maybe 200 amps isn't enough for a given home. We want to make sure that we're not guiding people to only go to 200 amps if that's not appropriate. One of the other tools that our team has been developing is an assessment tool for that very purpose, is to find out what's the right amount. But you can do things with sub-panels in addition to a panel. So there's ways to deal with that, but we'll be partnering with the staff to try to help provide input into the exact program design. So
Your
I'm
support.
feeling much better now.
Yeah,
Thank you.
your support of the your support of the motion is noted, and
Okay.
support of the matching grant. So,
yeah.
without getting into the weeds on the program,
Yeah.
I would like to allow
Thank you.
other speakers come up, but I do want to thank you for being here. Mr. Carney, please. Hello.
Hello, I'm Bruce Carney, and I am also very supportive of this proposal. To me, this is exactly the kind of innovation that Silicon Valley is known for, looking at the bigger picture, trying to solve the problem on a broad scale rather than just focusing on one piece of the solution at a time. The panel upgrade does seem to be the barrier that anyone would face if they were trying to fully electrify a typical California home. And so I applaud you all for making this proposal, and if I were in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's shoes, I can't imagine saying no to this proposal. In Mr. Balachandran's presentation last time, he talked about partnerships with academia, and I think this is a perfect example of something that should be instrumented for studying, not just in the year in which it's implemented, but over a number of years, to see how people's behavior changes, to see whether once they have an upgraded 200 amp panel, do they in fact go ahead and add an EV charger? Do they get an induction stove? Do they do the other things that the bigger panel makes possible? Or do they just say, thanks very much for the money and the water heater, I'm done? Heat pump water heaters are not well known even in the environmental community right now. And so if there's some way to tie this to giving your neighbors a tour of your new water heater, or doing things that help spread knowledge among potential customers, I think that would be a good small thing to add to the proposal. But to go back to my first point, this is a great idea, and I hope you support it.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to say anything? I know of at least one who's in the audience who is going to be a big supporter of this, and I won't call him out, but he is my alternate. Yeah, exactly. So I'd like to bring the discussion back up here amongst us, if we can come to a motion in some sort. Hello, Director Smith. Yes, Director Gibbons, if you'll. Terrific. Director Smith, are you ready to make a motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I move the staff recommendation.
I'll second that.
A second. So if I could call for a vote with all members, including Director Gibbons, excluding Director Sinks and Director Abikoga. Excuse me. You know what I mean, Margaret.
Director Grilly? Director Grilly, your vote, please.
Aye.
Director Tate? Director Smith?
A big aye.
Thank you. Director Miller? Aye. Director Sinks, I'll note an abstention. Director Rennie?
Aye.
Chair Corrigan?
Yes, aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Abikoga, an abstention. Director Harney?
Aye.
Director Bruins?
Aye.
Director Craig?
Aye.
Director Gibbons?
Yippee, aye.
Thank you.
So
That
one
motion
question
carries.
to the attorney. They wouldn't be noted as abstentions, they would be noted as recusals, right?
It could still be noted as an abstention, and we note in the record the reason why they've abstained, because they're board members of the Air Quality Board.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4, the fiscal year 18-19 budget priorities, including assumptions and the timeline. The presentation will be made by Don Eckert. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. We good?
Just one moment.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, fellow directors. I'm between you and a very cool e-bike presentation, so I'm going to be as quick as possible. But we do need to talk about budget priorities, or what I call funding priorities, as we prepare for the fiscal year 2018-19 budget. Let's see, what's the... Okay. So normally in the budget process, we would start off with talking about the strategic plan. We've talked internally amongst ourselves at staff and feel that the strategic plan is fairly strong. It probably just needs to be tweaked and updated, which we'll bring to you later in the budget process, most likely in July. So really want to just talk about budget priorities. I do, this is from staff's perspective, but I do want to encourage input from the general public as well as the board on priorities we have not covered here, and make sure that we do cover them as we assemble this budget. So we're not going to get into specific numbers tonight. This is just more of a high-level presentation. And just to kind of give you an overview of the roadmap, we have had some discussions at the Finance and Administrative Committee about the reserves policy. I think we'll get into more details of that in the June meeting. Then in July, we'll bring back to you an updated strategic plan and a first draft or proposed budget. We're dark in August, and then we will bring back to you a adopted budget for approval in September. So that's our roadmap. And just a reminder for the board, as well as all of us and staff, that the mission is still the same as defined in the strategic plan, and every segment of the agency, every dollar that we spend, in some way, shape, or form has to support that mission. So let's look at each segment of the agency, and we'll start off with account services and outreach. So here we're looking at program marketing and delivery. So we're developing a programs department. Out of that will be ideas for programs, and Don's group is going to be pivotal in getting those programs out to the public. So that'll be certainly a high-level item that we need to fund. Marketing strategy development. So as we finally get to a normal state, we hope, and we'll roll out Milpitas in June, staff will kind of relook to see what is the marketing strategy that we want to fund. We want to develop a web portal for electrification and decarbonization resources and tools. We want to be specific in our community outreach, and then ongoing support of customer advisory functions, such as the CPAG that we have now, the MOG, and whatever other continued support of those groups or whatever else develops out of that. Then looking at power supply. 90 cents for every dollar that goes out the door is related to power supply. Good news is most of our positions for next fiscal year are hedged. For the positions that are not hedged, that would be filled with bucket 2 or PCC 2. For this budget, we're going to assume those are going to be filled with PCC 1. And that relates to approximately about $4 million in incremental cost. Now, we have some uncertainty with Assembly Bill 1110, but I highly doubt that we're going to have that certainty figured out by the time we put this budget together. So I think one of the assumptions you're going to see for power supply is to build in any open positions that were bucket 2 to be filled with bucket 1. Our resource adequacy is fully hedged for next fiscal year, so that's good. Also, next summer in the fall timeframe, we'll be bringing much more details back to this board, but we do want to look at distributed energy resources and pitching an RFO sometime next fall to look at projects that are in our community, in our territory. And then lastly, we're right now going through as you well know, the 3 power purchase agreements that were based on the RFO from last fall. Should those 3 agreements come to fruition, we're actually in a position right now where we would not need to go back to the market to be compliant with SB 350. We would have what we need. However, if those results come in like we hope they do with the power purchase agreements, it makes economic sense to do so. We'll go back out in the market and pitch those. So and we've also gotten a lot of interest besides Monterey from other CCAs that want to be part of that RFO, should we do one. So that's pending. For finance and administration, we've talked a lot about reserves. I'll just mention this. About a couple of weeks ago at the CalCCA Summit, we had a gentleman from Moody's that was on a panel that I was on, and he mentioned that by the end of this calendar year, there will be a rating released for one of the CCAs. And I'm pretty sure I know which one that is. And once that's released by Moody's, I think it will be easier for other CCAs to get a rating. I also think we'll have then a roadmap of what those reserve targets should be based on what the rating they get. So I think it will be a nice roadmap for us once that's released at the end of this year. Girish mentioned to you the organizational chart in phase 1 last month. We'll be back to you this summer with another look at the organizational chart. As we add positions, I think we want to look at some capital investment in our facilities, whether it's improvements in our current suite or expanding the suite to another part of the building. Those are options that we first want to bring to the Finance and Administration Committee later in May and build that into the budget if it makes sense. And then with rates, 99 cents for every dollar that comes into the agency is user fees. It's based on rates. As we saw when we built this year's budget and back in August, it's great that we're disrupting the generation and the model that we have, and we're all part of that in this room. The bad part about that, though, is it does bring volatility, and I think in the short term we're going to see volatility in rates. So we definitely want to build some sort of a contingency in there as we put together what our anticipated rates will be for next fiscal year. And then attract and retain employees. It's not only just attract employees based on the housing and transportation issues to Silicon Valley, but also retain the employees we do have. There's a lot of new CCAs that are popping up on the landscape. They're all looking for people that have CCA experience. Where are they going to go for that? They're going to go to operating CCAs. So we definitely want to bring back to this board ideas that we have for benefits to retain our employees. Legislative and regulatory, I'm not going to go through these items. You're going to be briefed in the CEO report by Girish and Hillary on the Green Book and everything else that's hitting us on the regulatory front. But that certainly, whatever those issues land, we have to be in a position to be able to fund those. And then lastly, the newest department that we formed, which is decarbonization and grid innovations. We're going to start interviews tomorrow to start the process to hire the director. Obviously, we want to develop a roadmap for programs, then be able to launch them. Depending on what that roadmap looks like, we may want to change the funding formula we currently have for programs. Right now, it's currently 2% of operating revenues. We'll come back to you if that is warranted. And then you had an example from John earlier on grants, and that'll be something else that we want to finance if those opportunities arise. And that concludes my presentation for a first-time overview of next year's budget. Open for questions. This is a discussion item only.
Thank you. Director Gibbons, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Staff answered my questions earlier in the week, so I'm fine.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions up here? Yes.
Just a question, and I'm sorry, Dawn, for not having primed you with the question before. The facilities one just always struck me a little bit odd, because when we originally secured the space, it was like, oh, this space supports the growth plans and everything that we had. And are we saying that we're growing more, or the space that we got, even with the number of people we said we were going to have, is not quite the right amount of space?
I can, one of the thoughts we have is as we build the programs department, we may have contractors. We may want to accommodate interns and other part-time folks to help us. If we get to a staff of 25, it gets a little tight. I don't know if Rish, you want to add to that?
No, that's just it. I think when Tom put together the budget, we were looking at 21, and so we planned the space for a little bit more than that. And I think we do want, it's what he said, it's the interns, it's the program space, and there may be an opportunity in our building for adjacent suites that's coming up later this year.
Well, let me put my 2 cents in. There are a lot of subcommittee meetings that are held there right at the resource, right at our facilities now, and there are inadequate conference room resources. Is that a polite way to say it?
Well,
when we do some of these meetings, you pack 14 people into a room made for 8 people. It would be really neat if you could somehow find a space that had a slightly larger conference room for the finance committee, the risk assessment, and probably the executive committee as well.
Especially if you're going to continue to serve garlic pizza for lunch.
Especially with the garlic pizza.
I thought it was part of the strategy to keep those meetings short.
I am okay with the plan and the strategy. I just wanted a little bit more detail on facilities, and you gave me a chance to give you my 2 cents.
Right. And it's the conference rooms, and actually as we design programs, et cetera, when you think about, and many of you know this, when you go to high-tech firms, you have design thinking studios where you're spending weeks and months in a certain space looking at different projects and programs. We don't have a common space for that. So it's for all those above, all those reasons, and the conference rooms are really not very adequate right now.
Are there any other questions? I've got one, but I don't want to jump on anybody's toes. So tonight, I think what we're looking for is general direction from this board about what financial priorities we see, especially as a result of tonight's PowerPoint presentation. So what I think, correct me if I'm wrong, are we actually looking to make a motion as well, or are we just looking for direction?
This is just discussion only.
Great.
Just a direction.
So what I'd like to propose for procedure here is I do have at least one comment card from a member of the public. I'd like to entertain that and then bring the discussion up here, allow everybody who has a comment or thought that they would like to make to the larger dialogue, and then let's try to find some consensus and give some direction if we can. I'll do my best to distill everybody's comments and keep them to have one succinct set of priorities that we might be able to hand off as a board, so that we're giving staff some clarity about what we are likely to approve going forward. Does that serve staff well? Okay, great.
I'm hoping it's simpler than that.
Okay, I like it already. So let's start with James Talia, please.
Hi, thank you, James Talia again. So I think this overall is a great set of priorities, a good place to start with. I just have a couple of brief comments on the account services and outreach. The team I mentioned before that I'm working with on readiness for electrification, through some of that work, it's quickly become clear that for electrification and decarbonization, the resources and tools, you wouldn't want a customer, just to be a customer web portal, you would want a service provider and customer web portal. There would be different types of tools and resources for your trade allies, the contractors, the electricians, plumbers, architects. So they're going to be a critical, necessary element in order to sell to customers, and you'll be wanting to talk with them as well as with, and those tools and the web portal may have a different, it's like residents and business, customers, contractors. So that's one thing. The other is that related to what I mentioned before is thinking broadly about the future fit home or other ways to package these things, because that's a way to think about the budget, using the money effectively, because you don't have to throw a lot of incentive dollars at it. If you think about the fact that customers can save money by going EV and apply that, you just have to sell it as a package. It's basic economics of bundling. And the same with solar, net energy metering rates. Right now, SVCEA is providing a lot more money, very generous with those rates, that future solar customers, you may want to think about the amount of money that the solar customers are saving to try to use that as part of the package for electrification. But you have to talk about it as a package. So it's using the money wisely. So a couple things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to bring it, if there's nobody else from the public who'd like to speak, I'm going to bring the conversation back up here. Should we, yeah, please, Director Miller.
I don't think this is super complicated because I'm very comfortable with the priorities that have been laid forth. They match the strategic plan, And my only input was to make sure we got a little conference room if we're going to get a little more conference room if we got space. So my feedback would be I'm super comfortable with the plan, and I look forward to the budget process proceeding.
Any other comments? I'd like to just add two thoughts. One, I do think that it's two of the biggest challenges we're going to see in the next year, possibly two, is definitely going to be staffing related. In my limited experience, I believe that retaining staff is far less expensive than continuing to replace staff. And as we know, I think you alluded to it, these are pretty small pools and they're going to continue to get fished out of by each other. So I want to make sure that we're doing what we can do to make it as agreeable as possible to stay with SVCE and dedicate your time and energy to this endeavor here and to live in this area. So those are high priorities for me, staffing in particular and preparing for our future growth, both hit a real target. And then I think I'd like to just also be on record as saying this cross collaboration, both with our leveraging our money and our programs, is of great interest to me across other agencies here in our service area. So I really want to be on record saying that to our staff and really encouraging that freedom to continue to look and find opportunities to work with these agencies that have both grant monies available or the opportunity to cross-pollinate a program or cross-promote our agencies together. So with that, if there's no other comment, I'm happy to move on. Yes, you're allowed to talk now. Director Sinks.
So I would just second your thought. I mean, to the extent that the employees of our organization like the benefits we've provided, which were a little unconventional at the time we set it up, I'm delighted. I would be happy supporting staff going and doing a comp study. So if, no matter, what benefits we might want to consider in total comp package, I think a fair way to look at what we're doing is to make sure we're being competitive and paying to market. We have a responsibility as a public agency to do that thoughtfully, but we know we're in a competitive, tight labor market all over, and periodically studying how our peers are compensating staff would be of great interest to me.
And thank you for
I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to, I don't think we can't afford to overpay excessively, right, as a public agency, but we want to be sure that we're competitive and we're retaining the best workforce that we can.
And thank you for that comment, Director Sinks. We did recently commission Bryce Consulting to assist staff with a comp study.
Oh,
we look forward
for all of our positions?
For all positions. So we look
Wonderful.
forward to discussing those results later
Thank
this
you.
summer.
Director Gibbons, before we move on, I'd like to check in with you. Do you have any comments?
No, I thought it was a great way of moving the board to where we're going to be going over the next few months.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you for your
Thank you.
report. I look forward to hearing what comes up in the budget. So the next item is a very exciting one, the Bike to the Future recap. Pamela Leonard is going to lead the discussion, but I understand some key things, our presentations can be made by two of our directors who were actually in attendance. We do absolutely want to thank the City of Gilroy for hosting this event. It was very successful with over 100 attendees to celebrate. I think it was 8 teams that competed. So I'd love to hear more. We'll start with you guys. Sorry, who am I starting with? So we'll start with Director Harney and Director Bruins. How about that?
Sure. Sounds great. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing the e-bike to the future to the Gilroy Gardens and to the community. It was really fantastic. There was a lot of involvement with our Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, and they did a lot of community engagement trying to get people involved. And one of the nice things that I thought staff came up with was bringing a local Girl Scouts group out to do the flag presentation, and it was just like, it was a really nice touch, because it was a competition, as staff said, and what couldn't be more appropriate than that.
Are you going to share the incident with the flag and what,
Yeah,
what these?
Now you have to tell us.
So the stage was set, the tent was there. They had to walk up some stairs, and they were holding a tall flag. And as they got to the top of the stairs, it hit the tent structure, and the flag fell. And the young girl said, "Oh my God, we have to burn the flag now!" It was just a great kickoff.
That's great.
So they obviously know their. Anyhow, so it was a great kickoff. There was a lot of staff engagement there. The students that all showed up were very energetic, and they were very thankful for what Silicon Valley Clean Energy had done, particularly around getting sponsorship and making sure that there were a number of different judging points for the event. The gardens, if you don't know, is set against the backdrop of hills in what we call the Solis Valley locally on Hecker Pass. And I promised the crowd that as they showed up in the morning that the clouds would burn and the sun would be out, and sure enough they were. So it was just a really beautiful set point. There was also a number of community organizations that came out, and I was really impressed with. So VTA was there. Unfortunately, the electric bus didn't make it. There was some issues with that we all understood. ELV Motors were there, along with a local electric bike retailer, and people got to try the bikes, and it was just a lot of fun. So thank you all those who organized it, and also for picking the Gilroy Gardens. It was just fantastic.
Director Bruins?
Yeah, I'll tell you, board members, you guys missed out on an absolutely fabulous event. For an inaugural event, it was phenomenal. A couple of things that I wanted to comment on is, first of all, for those that might not have been aware, we actually had 6 high schools that participated, with one high school, Saratoga High, manning 2 teams. Of these 7 teams, one of the things that was most impressive for me is 2 of them were totally manned by, or personed by, freshmen. And so I think with that comes the next generation of kids who are going to, those kids I can guarantee you they're going to be there when we do this next year. They put so much of their heart and soul into this. The students were phenomenal. Staff did a great job organizing all these different events. And I think I'll talk about probably my favorite one had to be their presentations. High schoolers getting in front of a group of people, they do it in classroom, they do presentations, but this time they've got a microphone, they're sitting up there, they're standing up on this stage, they got their bikes and such. And I can tell you, it was wonderful. It's always the innocence of kids, because they just said what was on their mind. So first of all, they were all excited, and they really got into this whole clean energy thing. But when they got into some of what they learned and some of their challenges, you had one team, I won't name schools, you had one team that got up there and says, it's basically, they ended by saying, it's a miracle that we're still talking to one another. Because they did experience, real life kind of situations where sometimes things don't go smoothly and there's a lot of stress and such. But they were glad they made their way through that part of the journey. You learned a lot about their creativity and ingenuity, because one team, the way they mounted their motor and such, the sprockets on the gears and the sprockets on the bike didn't exactly line up, and so they had to now figure out what to do with these kind of things that just didn't mesh properly. And so they got a soda can, and they cut the soda can, and they used the soda can to shim the parts, okay? So they were really into problem solving. They had to learn about budgeting money, budgeting time. So all in all, it was a real well-rounded educational program. So they're enthusiastic. Several of the kids wanted to make sure that we're doing this again next year. But it goes farther than that, because it's not just the student appreciation, it was also the parents. parents, in our society today, sometimes a lot of parents are really helicopter protecting. Some of these parents, they're willing to just let go and watch these kids. Other ones saying that they had to learn a lot because when their child was soldering and trying to build their battery, and all of a sudden there were sparks and flames, and saying, okay, it's okay. But, I think the parents learned a lot, but at the end, they were really, one, I think took a lot of pride in their kids, and two, they really were appreciative of how much their kids learned, and they thought it was really great to put all these skills together. The other thing is, I think the other thing that stood out is the mentors. These kids were not shy. I think they probably had Kelly's on speed dial, because it was like call 1-800-KELLY to get an assistant, and Kelly would then point them, and I'll always remember the name Connor. But these kids, they got help from their mentors. Mentors didn't do anything for them other than guide them. But these kids were so appreciative of the people that had stepped up to help them as well. So I'm really looking forward to this becoming an annual event. And for those of us up here, when you recall when this was brought before us, there were several of us, I will use the term us, who kind of had our doubts about some of this, our concern about, gosh, these are high school kids, there's not a lot of runway here. How do you reach out to these kids? And, are we even going to get anybody? And timing of year, it's test season, all of that. Well, you know what? They did it. I was shocked to see that we had 7 teams. I think one parent says, oh, it's too bad there's so few. And I'm going, boy, it exceeded my expectation. But, I think word of mouth is going to happen next year. And I'm really hoping that this board will, even though you guys did not get to have the experience that we had, will enthusiastically embrace doing this again next year. And I also want to stand up and give a major round of applause to Kelly and the entire staff, because it was a humongous effort. So thank you.
Hard not to think of supporting it after hearing those comments. It's amazing. But I think there is a presentation you guys would like to make as well.
Hi, good evening, directors. Pamela Leonard. Thank you for the recap of the event for those of you who were able to attend. And for those of you who were unable to attend, we have a quick little 1-minute video recap so you can see what the day was all about. Please cue the video.
Oh, volume. Oh, no, just kidding.
Thank you. Since this was Kelly's project, I'm going to turn it over to her to kind of explain some of the details of what you just saw in that video when the presentation is cued. Thank you.
While they're queuing that, if I could, I want to do a shout out for, 2 of the high schools, but first is Milpitas. Milpitas, they got their bike started having some problems, and they were not discouraged by it, they were trying to troubleshoot this. So they actually missed all the actual, the time and the laps and all of those things, but they then did their presentation. And I'll tell you, even despite the adversity of having a bike that wasn't working, they got it to work. They did their whole presentation kind of giggling their way through that, but they got through their presentation. And by the way, it had 3 women and 1 guy on that team. I was proud of them because it was not dominated only by the males. But anyway, they at the very end they said, and by the way, we did get our bike working, and they lifted up the rear end and they hit the gas on it. It was, or the electricity on it. So that was really wonderful. And the other team that deserved a shout out is we did have one minor incident with one of the Saratoga teammates. And that team also had, in the face of adversity, they were faced with their mixed feelings. Do they continue on when their teammate was heading off to a hospital to be checked out, or whether or not they continue in his honor, and they chose to continue in his honor. And so I thought that was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bruins, for your really kind words, and also Director Harney. And thank you both for coming out, in addition to alternate Director Yulo. That was great seeing you guys there. And of course, thank you all for approving the event to happen in the first place. And it exceeded my expectations as well. I had no idea what to expect from the students, and I'm glad that they exceeded what I was expecting. So I hope you enjoyed the video as well. So this presentation is going to be mostly visual. So the first event that we had was the Acceleration Challenge, and pictured on the left is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commissioner, Zach Hilton. He was able to lend us a radar gun from the police department, so that was awesome. And the highest speed reached for that was actually 40 miles per hour, wow. So pretty impressive there. And then next, this pictured is the obstacle course challenge, which was kind of a silly mix-up from the more technical challenges. So in this one, it was testing more the e-bike riders' ability to strategize. And so you see on the right, they're wearing those vests with the balls that stick onto it. And so they had to do a full circle around each cone, and then on the way there, they would have to pick up the ball, stick it on, and then on the way back, doing the same thing, doing a full circle around the cone and then returning it. So it was more how they best wanted to strategize doing that to get a fast time on that. And then lastly, to test the bike's efficiency, we did a range challenge and judged which team depleted the least amount of battery during 16 laps. And then afterward, the teams, as Jeannie Bruin sort of highlighted, did the presentations of their e-bikes, and that's the bulk of what the bikes were judged on. So here are just pictures of the teams. We have 2 from Saratoga and Milpitas here, the mostly women's team on the right. And then...
That's actually Los Altos High School on the left there, not Saratoga.
My mistake. You are correct, yeah.
It does look familiar. In Saratoga wearing Los Altos shirts.
Yeah. Here are some photos of the presentations. And then our third place winner were from Saratoga, the E-Fish team. Second place was Mountain View Spartans. And first place was Fremont Fire Eagles. And just to note, they had a really great strategy. They actually purchased their e-bike parts sort of contingent on what was ranked highest for the challenges. And I think that was a really good way of going about it. And I think it may have been what won them the competition. So some key takeaways for me was that overall, even though there were only 7 teams this year, the quality of those teams were really great. And with the resources that I had at my disposal, it was actually, I think, the most that I could handle with only having a few mentors with e-bike expertise to count on. Secondly, I don't think this is exclusively for robotics students, and a lot of the students this year were not actually in any robotics club, so that was an interesting note. And lastly, as Director Bruins pointed out as well, regardless of all the timeline concerns that we had on our end, being a tight timeline. The students will make it work if they're motivated enough to do so, and I think a competition is enough motivation for that. So that's all for the presentation, and thank you again.
Outstanding. Kelly, thank you. This really, I remember when you pitched this idea to this board, it's just an outstanding outcome. And thank you both for being there and making such a heartfelt summary of what happened. I won't miss it again if I can help it. It really sounded amazing. So thank you all, and to staff who supported them. Yes.
I do have a question for staff. I know we'd issued a press release. Did you also reach out to the principals at each of the schools to let them know about the teams participating, and so that they have an opportunity to recognize the kids or do something? I don't know if they do their morning announcements. Who knows with technology today what they do in high schools. But if they do morning announcements or if they do things in terms of their own local newspaper, have we provided something so that the kids can get recognized in terms of their own peer network?
I do know the Fremont High School principal retweeted and gave a shout out to his team, but we're still recovering from the weekend, and we can definitely do that. I think that's a great idea, and especially if this is something we're going to be repeating in future years, we're going to want to get the word out as soon as possible so that we can continue to keep this on the students' radar.
Could you also make sure that the cities that have high schools that participated get that information so that we can call it out from our dioceses about, our own thanks and gratitude that they participated? I know
I did it last night.
Good, great.
Yeah, I got to do it. So
You got to do it, great.
teams, I got to do it.
Yay.
You have 2 teams, yeah.
So huge success. Many, many, many thanks. Are there any other questions? Yes, Rod.
Yeah, I would only note that actually you did have some roboticists. The 971 team is the first robotics team, so those yellow jerseys are there. In fact, robotics. If you want to get better participation, I would really recommend shifting this to not overlap with the first season. I think you could get 2 or 3 times as many teams. So I congratulate you for this first attempt. I would support doing this again. Our experience in robotics more generally is if you change up the problem every year, requiring a different solution, the incumbents don't have a chance to simply do exactly what they did again, right? So, in first, you still have a drivetrain every year, and you have a robot that weighs a max 120 pounds. But the specific stuff that goes on the robot to throw a ball or to, move a game piece, and then hoist yourself up, all the mechanics change every year. And so I think if you were to do this again, putting some twist into it, so that they couldn't simply just, tweak what the existing design would be a great thing. So those are my suggestions, and thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll note, I did pass the invitation on to our superintendent, so I don't know how Fremont High in Sunnyvale managed to participate, but I know she got the word, I believe she got the word out to all the principals in the 5 schools. You did too. Well, great. So
Terrific.
glad they prevailed.
It's nice to have such a feel-good report. Thank you, Kelly, very much. Okay, the next item is the CEO. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. So sorry, Director Gibbons, please. And for those of you who could not hear that, Campbell is calling dibs. Okay, great. Next is the CEO report, item number 6. Hello, Girish,
Hello.
would you like to
Yes,
get us up to speed?
I have a couple of things. We're going to start off with our anniversary video. It's a short video that Pamela's team put together, so let's just watch that.
Here at Silicon Valley Clean Energy, we came together as a community to reduce carbon emissions.
And preserve our future.
In our first year, we eliminated 1.2 billion pounds of carbon emissions, saved customers $4 million, and became debt-free. For 2018, we've increased our energy rate savings to 6%, resulting in $20 million of on-bill savings for our customers. Over the next year, we'll continue with the commitments we made to our communities.
We are negotiating contracts for new renewable development for solar, wind, and energy storage. We'll eliminate another 1.1 billion pounds of carbon emissions, add our 13th community, Milpitas, and we'll be launching customer programs focused on decarbonization and grid innovation.
We're here to stay. The future is electric.
All right. So I do have a short report with very large attachments, very lengthy attachments. So anyway, the report itself, if you have questions in it, I'd be happy to answer those questions. But I did want to put up one slide related to the programs. And once I'm done with that, I'll call up Hillary to provide a brief update on legislative and regulatory affairs. So while this is coming up, so the slide that's coming up is to describe, it's actually, well, it's to describe how the CPAG recommendations that are coming in June. We have the MOG, the Member Agency Working Group. They're going to be providing us input in July. And as Don said, we are going to hire our new director of decarbonization. We had the interviews Thursday and Friday, so we hope to get this person on board the beginning to middle of June. So we expect to bring you a roadmap of where we think we'll be going as on the program side in September, and a more detailed roadmap in December. So that's all I just said is up here with these different kind of spines coming together. The point being, when you get the CPAG recommendations next June, I've talked to Peter Evans about this too, so we know what the framework of how to take in the customer group recommendations. We'll take the member agency group recommendations next month. I do need some time with the new director working with account services director, power supply director to come up with that high-level program plan. And in September, fall, and in December, we'll have a little more detailed plan. We have some models. The city of San Jose has done a very good climate plan. They call it Climate Smart 2.0. They're really looking out about 25 years. They're following the Paris pathway. And so when you look at programs, it needs to be done in some context. So if you're bending this carbon curve downward, let's look at this contextually. There was a comment made earlier, this thing about how do you involve academia? So anytime you're doing a program, how can you improve communication? How can you reach out to the low-income community, academia, startups? And then there's a lot of modeling that needs to go in to know this pathway we're going to be on. So this is the general framework that I wanted to bring to your attention, provide you context for things that are coming up in the next 6 months. If there are no questions, and that I'll ask Hillary to provide an update on the legislative and regulatory issues.
Good evening, directors. It's been a busy month. I guess they all are, but this one in particular. So we have on both the regulatory and legislative side a lot of things moving forward. The single biggest thing this month by far is the Green Book that was released last Thursday by the California Public Utilities Commission. And since we are addressing that in greater detail later in this meeting, I will set that aside for now. But we have plenty of other stuff going on the regulatory side. So this week, evidentiary hearings are taking place in the PCIA proceeding. So that's an opportunity for our witnesses who submitted testimony back at the beginning of April to be cross-examined by other parties and by also the judge in this proceeding. So CalCCA witnesses are going on the stand tomorrow, actually. It's been the investor and utilities and other stakeholders so far this week. But this will wrap up on Friday, and then we'll be looking at briefs, potentially final oral arguments through the summer, and still a proposed decision in July. So we are still on track to be implementing a new PCIA starting January 2019. On the integrated resource planning proceeding, this, if you'll recall, we've come to a lull in the role of the CPUC. Everyone has kind of split up now to work on the individual integrated resource plans that are due at the beginning of August. So we are continuing to work on that. The biggest piece of news on that this month is that we have decided to split up the compliance side of the integrated resource plan that is due to the Public Utilities Commission and the more public-facing document that we would eventually like to turn that into. And that's for two main reasons. One being, as Grish just discussed, this summer we'll be getting a lot of new information from the MOG and the CPAG about the direction we're going to go with programs. And we see our programs and our interaction with behind-the-meter resources as a really important part of our resource portfolio. So what we will be doing is working through the next coming months on the specific aspects that are mandated by the Public Utilities Commission, and then we'll be coming back in the fall to incorporate new information into that related to programs and produce a document aimed more at the general public. Also, this will give us more time to focus in the current months on the CPUC side, because since it's the first time that this process is taking place, there is a back and forth conversation with CPUC staff to try and iron out some of the details. That always happens the first time you go through a process. So we're splitting those two up. And then on the bond methodology proceeding, this one has been quiet for a while. If you'll recall, the last action we had on this was in October, but we did finally get a proposed decision on that. And so we'll be finding out probably by the middle of the summer what the new bond amount for us should be, and that will be reflected, our estimates will be reflected in the proposed updated budget this summer. And then finally, next Wednesday, we have our long-awaited day in Sacramento coming up. So we have meetings set up with about 8 of our legislators, and we will be covering everything from introduction to the CCA business model for those who need it, our history, mission, all the way to, in a stroke of very good timing, the issues raised in the Green Book just last Thursday. So we're excited to be moving forward with that, and there will be a debrief at the next board meeting. That's about it. Any questions, comments?
Anybody up here?
Well, I have
Director,
a question for our CEO, if I might.
Please, I just want to make sure, Director Gibbons, you'll have an opportunity after Director Sinks.
I was actually thrilled to see this assessment of Coyote Anderson for storage. Can you give us a little more color on that?
So we were actually approached by City of Morgan Hill. Alternate Director Yulo brought this opportunity up to us, and we're doing a feasibility study in collaboration with. So we're going to pay for the study with Inline. Santa Clara Valley Water District is going to be providing a lot of data to us, and they are actually going to be draining Anderson Reservoir and to do some repairs and upgrades. They also have a plant, a small hydro plant, I think it's less than a megawatt, they have an expiring QF contract with PG&E. So there may be some opportunities, that power plant, and also looking at maybe getting pump storage between Anderson and Coyote. Now, we expect it's going to be very expensive. However, it makes sense to look at it, because that's part of our strategic plan, is not just to look at energy storage, but also look at local opportunities. I think there'll be some ancillary value in doing that study, because when you're figuring out the value of pump storage, you've got to look at market prices that energy storage can capture. And that study will also be valuable to us when we go out with that distributed energy resources RFO. We'll start to look at how we can capture these maybe volatile price spikes through using energy storage. So even though this is a pump storage, that's why there's a broader strategy to energy storage, and this is just one study.
So I appreciate that. And when we get this study done, since we're paying for it, does that give us, should we and they want to pursue some deal, does it give us a first in with them or some such thing? Or are there terms we can talk to them about that
Yeah,
would just not, allow us to be perhaps be the first that they would engage with on any
At this
deal?
point, in terms of just moving this forward,
Yeah.
I didn't ask for a right of first refusal on that. This is going to be a long, if anything
Yeah, okay.
comes out of it, I think that would be something we'd consider in the next phase if it makes sense to move forward with that next phase of engineering studies.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the initiative. I know it may be expensive, but I think it helps the narrative that we're creating with the other thing you're working on, which is looks like we're still on track to execute perhaps as many as 3 contracts in June, right?
I think it'll be most likely the wind contract in June,
Okay.
and maybe 1 solar. The second solar contract is not moving as quickly as
Okay.
we'd hope.
All right. Well, I look forward to us being leaders, and I appreciate these initiatives.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? I just want to wish you the best in Sacramento next week, Hillary, and to all the directors who are going, best wishes and carry the flag with pride. If there's nothing else, I'm going to move on to the executive committee report. There's nothing to report. The committee did not meet since we had a light agenda, and in fact, we are also planning to or requesting to go dark in May as an additional light agenda then. If that's acceptable with the board, the next regularly scheduled executive committee meeting will be on Tuesday, June 26th. Okay, super. The next is the Finance and Administration Committee. Report out, Director Corrigan. I have no report. The Finance and Administration Committee has not met since their March 9th meeting, and their next meeting will occur May 30th at 11 a.m. at the SVCEA office in a very small conference room. Small and smelly. I can't
We
take.
love the smell of garlic. So,
Yeah, more garlic,
Good
more
one.
garlic, please. Okay, item number 9 is the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee report. Director Sinks.
Thank you very much. So the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee of the Board met on Monday, May 7th. The committee discussed the Green Book that Hillary referenced and developed the outline of a letter that will be presented to the board tonight in item 1 of the special meeting. We had to do that because we wanted you to see that and consider taking action on it, and that was the way to notice this. So hang around after the regular meeting. The committee also finalized plans for SVC's day of meetings with legislators in Sacramento on May 16th. Who's going? I know Nancy and I are going. Courtney, you're going?
I am not
No?
going.
Who else? Anybody?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we also have, there's quorum issues, so.
Sure.
We're going to have Monterey Bay with us too.
Yeah, but if anybody wants to come, some of us have council meetings on Tuesday, so we're going to be heading out early on Wednesday. If you change your mind, we'd love to have you, and Director Cortese might be able to join us. He's going to be in Sacramento the day before, and we'll look at his schedule. He reports. And he was sorry he couldn't be here tonight. He had a county meeting, and they were taking votes until after this meeting started. I'll make one report. I guess the other thing to report is that we did review several bills that were relevant to the CCEA community and gave direction to staff. Now on the Green Book, I wanted to make one particular point. Looking at the Green Book, it's only been out a few days, but it's pretty clear that there's a tacit assumption that reliability, affordability, and decarbonization seem to be only able to be achieved through a very centralized system. You know, CPUC, under their strong central control, they regulate IOUs. I would note that we have a very successful model that's deregulated, which are all the municipal utilities in the state. But the CPUC at this point, or at least as expressed through this Green Book, is looking at CCAs, direct access, and all the behind-the-meter provider resources, largely in terms of how they threaten the historical model, right? The incumbency model, as if we were also IOUs. And you know, in my view, they're rather ignoring the ways the stakeholders are working to proactively meet the core goals of reliability, affordability, and decarbonization, such as we're doing here. I think we can fairly make the point that a more productive way to conduct such an evaluation would really be to have a more inclusive conversation with all the stakeholders and not consider us threats to their control, but rather really talk about how the difference we're making and recognize that we bring value even in a framework where not all the decisions have to be centralized. And I would welcome other members of the legislative committee making comments at this time.
Anyone? Yes? How about you first?
I'm you this
Director
time?
Rennie.
And she's him? Okay.
She's her.
Oh, okay.
Then her.
So the part of the Green Book comments that I think bothered me the most was they draw this comparison between the pre-crisis that occurred in California, as we all know, almost caused PG&E to go bankrupt. And they're saying basically this explosion of CCAs is like this deregulation that occurred before the crisis, and it doesn't make any sense. So it's like they don't even understand the difference between a CCA and these ESPs. You know, the deregulation was really about letting energy providers charge whatever they want, let the market kind of go crazy. And for them, it was really about profitability. CCAs are a completely different animal. They're not about profitability at all. We're run by elected officials who care about the people. If brownouts occur because of this, you think we're going to promote something that's going to cause brownouts? So that's, I think, one of the things that's really ridiculous about their comparison. They're saying deregulation, CCAs, letting CCAs come in, this deregulation is going to end up in non-reliability, brownouts, because we don't care about making sure reliability occurs. I mean, we're closest to the customers. Why? It's ridiculous. Why would we do anything to cause brownouts? There's really three pieces. They're looking at the reliability, the affordability, and reliability, affordability, and what was the other?
Decarbonization.
And decarbonization. And CCAs really came about because the current system of IOUs are not innovating fast enough. People, our voters are saying, go do this. Our citizens are saying, go do this, because we're not decarbonizing fast enough with the current system. And in many cases, we're saying it's more affordable to go this way. And then, so the only other piece is reliability. Well, there's no way that we're going to let brownouts occur. So it's a completely ridiculous comparison. I'll let
Director
go
Smith,
next.
I think, as Director Tate. How about if Director Smith first and then you?
Okay.
We have two of you?
Okay. I'm doing the best I can here.
We'll try to be agreeable. So one thing I'd like to note is responding to Director Sink's comment about municipal utilities is that the Green Book, it's called the California Consumer Choice Project. It's put out about customer choice. And the document doesn't mention municipal utilities, and there are dozens of them in California, including the nearest one, which is in Santa Clara. And these municipal utilities predate CCAs by decades. And not only that, they have not threatened reliability in their many decades of existence. And furthermore, they can and do respond to the changing needs of the local communities. And it is definitely a counterexample. These municipal utilities are a counterexample of how the decentralization, it actually helps markets thrive. The electrical markets have been thriving through these municipal utilities. And the CPUC's Customer Choice Report, the Green Book, is by no means comprehensive if it doesn't include municipal utilities, which are definitely a part of the landscape.
Terrific. And Director Tate.
Yeah, one of the areas that's totally ignored in the Green Book is the operator, the CAISO, the operator itself. They don't hardly even mention them, let alone bring them in to oversee a lot of the things and bring innovations and new kinds of trends that get introduced into the system. So it just kind of didn't make a whole lot of sense that they've ignored so much part of the system that's really essential to it.
Anybody else from the legislative committee that would like to add any other thoughts to this conversation? Okay.
I appreciate my colleagues. I mean, we spent a lot of time
Sure.
going through this with staff, and obviously these are early findings, but the tone here is very troubling. The idea that, somehow resource adequacy is threatened. I mean, just our existence and our ability to work with existing providers who have that resource adequacy to obtain it is just an example of the fact that we really don't need all of this centralized control to be successful in moving the needle on climate change and ensuring reliable energy system for California. So thank you for allowing us to report tonight.
Thank you for doing it. Are there any other comments, either from Hillary or from you, Garish?
I think we're going to be discussing our action item on the next meeting, so reserve for
Okay.
that.
So then I'm going to move on and allow any board members to make announcements or make direction on future agenda items. If there are any comments, please make them known now. Yes?
I just had a quick thank you to staff for sponsoring and being at the Mountain View's annual Family Spring Parade. It was really great for me to see our staff there manning a table, and the sponsorship obviously helped. And I hope that it looked like people were coming to the table quite a bit, and so I thought that was a really great way to do some outreach, and it was actually our biggest ever parade, so it was a good opportunity. So thank you so much for being there.
Any other comments?
I'll say the same for our Earth Day out here. I think we had a lot of participation, especially in the morning. The car is always a hit, the logoed car. I think that's terrific. At my Rotary Club today, on another thought, we had a professor from Stanford who has been inspiring to me for many years, Mark Z. Jacobson, who has been a big evangelist on wind, water, and solar, saying the whole Earth can do this. And I'll pass on the video link through staff when the video gets posted in the next couple of days. But if you want to put what we're doing in some perspective, and you want to hear from him about how he personally in his house installed a electric heat pump water heater and also this other heating cooling appliance that we talked about during the study session, that I mentioned during the study session, I would, it's a half an hour well worth your time. Mark Jacobson, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, if nothing else, I'm going to adjourn tonight's regular meeting, and then we're going to reconvene immediately to discuss a special agenda item. So hearing nothing else, I adjourn officially the regularly scheduled meeting, and now call the special meeting to order.
Correct.
Are we satisfied now?
We're in good shape. We're on the right track.
Terrific. Thank you. So I don't really have much agenda guidance here on how this is going to proceed. Who would like to make the presentation, or?
So let me start with a couple of comments.
Thank you.
So at the ad hoc legislative committee meeting, we discussed, and the committee basically said we need to write a letter, and thought it would be most effective if the letter to our legislators was signed by all the board members. So staff has put together a draft letter. It's a little delicate. How do we get, so part of the process here, I'm going to ask Greg to go through the process of how we get your input, not just today, but also the request is to delegate authority to the chair and myself to finalize the letter. But since we're going to be asking for your signature, I'm expecting that comments you give us today, we're going to have to edit it, have you take another look at it. So I'm just going to ask Greg to go through that process of how we're going to get to final signatures.
And before we do that, can I just request of my fellow directors that we don't craft the letter at the dais tonight? No. That if you have specific thoughts or edits you'd like to make, you make them briefly and succinctly, and that if you're in agreement, we just move forward. If you'll bear with us.
So,
thank you.
The process here is to provide a means to allow each of the board members to actually sign the letter for its impact. And so we've come up, working together here with staff, come up with the following approach, which would be after taking the comments tonight, a letter will be revised and then sent to you individually. So each of you individually can review the revised letter and provide any comments back to staff, again, individually, so we don't have board members communicating upon themselves. And that'll be received by staff, and then staff will review that letter with the chair to finalize it. And then there will be a final letter at that point in time for signature. At that point, then, the letter individually will be sent out to each of you, and then you could give your either your concurrence or not to whether you would want your name attached to the letter. And staff will have your signatures in advance so that staff then can mechanically finalize that letter with each of your signatures.
What's the timeline? We're going to get it. We're hoping to get it turned around. How quickly?
I think it'll be Monday, Tuesday of next week. We'd like to get this early next week. We'd like to get the letter out.
Anybody here, including Director Gibbons, anybody here concerned that they may not be reachable on the next few days, including the Sunday, Monday, leading up to Monday and Tuesday to get this thing finalized? Okay, terrific.
Yeah, we want to take this letter with the
Sacramento.
Sorry, Director Gibbons, please.
We have a process to gather signatures.
Okay, terrific.
We'll communicate that with the director directly.
He's pointing at the sky as if you could see that, but we'll make sure we get your signature.
Thank you very much.
Good.
So I'll hand it over to Hillary.
A question on the process?
Yes, sorry, Director Miller.
Just on the process, just two things. One was on the signatures. We did this before, a couple letters we did with the West Valley and North Cities, 9 signators that it took. So Rod was involved in this. First thing, which I think made it look more official, was with our signatures, they put our city seals.
Yes.
Which would be a nice touch if you can get those. The second comment was, we left the room having agreed on all the principles of a letter.
Yeah.
And there's so many issues that people have with particular wording that next week may be highly optimistic. In fact, we took 8 weeks to get this letter done, having agreed on all of the principles before we left the meeting. So I don't know how we want to do it differently, but I can say each of us will have concerns about signing based on little tiny phrases. And process-wise, you're going to have to herd the cats carefully to make sure that the phrases don't trip up everybody else.
If we get a majority of support, can we send the letter omitting those who choose not to participate?
Well, yeah, and the way this is set up here, at the end of the day, if someone doesn't want to sign that letter, they don't have to.
Of course.
And that'll be an individual choice for all of you. Obviously, the effort here is to come up with something that's going to be satisfactory to everybody. But that would be, in the end of the day, that would be how that will turn out.
The more signatures, the more powerful
Of
is my
course.
interpretation.
That's
So it's not like a majority
But I do want to
sender.
encourage individuals who want to recraft and micromanage the letter down to specific words, phrases, and may instead of shall, et cetera, may prevent us from getting this managed in a timely manner. So I'll ask you to use your own discretion about the edits you are proposing.
I think you hit it on the nail, which is there's a bunch of things that you may not like the way it's worded, but if the meaning you are okay with, then you're probably better off saying, please add my name, rather than trying to get caught up on the actual details of every word.
Thank you very much.
Yes, agree.
Yes, Director Gibbons. I certainly think that's the hope and intent. Okay, thank you. Hillary?
So before we talk about the specifics of the letter, I wanted to make a couple points about the Green Book. And as was mentioned in the CEO report, so this is a product of the California Consumer Choice Project. It started last May, and when the stakeholder process was kicked off, it was framed as a way to sort of pause at a time when there was a lot of change happening in the industry and look at whether or not these organic changes really merited looking at something even broader. Hence the customer choice name and the focus of several of the stakeholder events on states and countries that have introduced full retail competition into their retail markets. So when this project was started at the CPUC, it was really kind of a big horizon, actually quite positively framed project. And we had a couple of stakeholder events that attracted large audiences last year. We had an en banc on customer choice in May. Then in October, there was a event up in Sacramento where they brought in speakers from states and countries that have instituted retail competition to give a presentation to legislators and to CCA community stakeholders. So it started out from a place of recognizing basically an inflection point in the energy industry and trying to be mindful about how we go forward with it. But I think that since we had the last stakeholder event in October, we have seen a concerted change in the tone that the CPUC has been taking towards CCAs and a number of the other sort of newer forces in the industry. If we think about what's happened last fall, for example, we had draft resolution E4907, which instituted very strong restrictions, or tried to, on new CCAs forming. We had the decision in the Integrated Resource Plan that really expanded the CPUC's oversight over CCA procurement. So while the staff was going back and distilling their takeaways from the public stakeholder events held last year under the Consumer Choice Project, we really saw the tone change at the CPUC, and that is very strongly reflected now in this document. I think this document is notable from the CPUC for a couple reasons, but one of the biggest is it is written for a different audience than a lot of their work. A lot of the documents that come from the CPUC are designed for the stakeholders who are actively participating in CPUC proceedings. And you know, that's as it should be. That's a lot of it is highly technical, but this document is totally different. It is written in different language. It's written for a much broader audience, and it's written to be looked at by the whole policymaker community. So when we look at where this has been circulated and how it's been circulated through the media, this is reaching a much broader audience, and specifically the legislature. There are some very transparent appeals in this document for the legislature to step in and create solutions to what the authors see as the threats to the industry right now. And so for that reason, the tone of this document is really important for where the community goes, because this is being seen by a lot of decision makers, and the general framing that they take to this issue then could have a big impact on what we see in the legislative and policy communities going forward. So there are so many things that you could say in response to the Green Book, and we have one page of a letter. So what we're really trying to do with this letter is take issue with the general framing that the proliferation we are seeing in the industry of alternatives to the traditional model, the IOUs regulated by the CPUC, is fundamentally an opportunity as opposed to a threat. I think that the report is entirely correct in identifying reliability, affordability, and decarbonization as really key core principles that we must always uphold. But the tone of the report is very much one of how can we sort of defend these principles against the encroaching forces of decentralization in the industry. And for a document that sets the tone for how our decision makers are going to think about energy policy in the rest of this legislative session and in the upcoming years, we really just felt strongly that this was not an appropriate start. So there will be lots of opportunity to provide statistics, to provide technical rebuttal on any more specific questions. But with this one-page letter, we really wanted to start out making the point that to compare this point in the industry where we have an unprecedented flourishing of stakeholder engagement, of institutional innovation, that we really, to compare that to the point at which the state was running up to a crisis, which understandably has cast a long shadow on the industry, that's really not an appropriate starting point. We're looking at a categorically different landscape. As members of the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee mentioned, different business models. Really, this analogy is not productive, and what we should be doing is looking at how we can harness the energy coming from communities, coming from cities, even individuals, from companies, to uphold these three principles. So that's what this letter is designed to do, and I tried to create messaging and tone that I thought would reflect the philosophy of this board, but I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback, and I welcome comments to help us create a letter that everyone can get behind.
Thank you. All right. Should we start up here? Then, Rod, how about you first?
Thanks. I love this letter. I think you've done a great job crafting it. I think we need to be very clear and direct in answering the Green Book. I wouldn't mind if we found, because it's a page of words, right? For the time-stressed legislator that we might be addressing, I wouldn't mind if, at your discretion, we turn some of these key phrases toward the end of some of these paragraphs bold, right? It's just to make the point stand out. The other thing, and maybe we're just not ready for this, but a good response as this is, are we ready to ask the legislature to consider taking some actions which would be more prescriptive to the role of the CPUC on some of these issues? Maybe, I know you're probably not at a place to be very specific about that yet, but maybe we should be suggesting that, we foresee and we'll be back to the legislature with some specific remedies that we could suggest to clarify the role of the CPUC. Just a question. Thanks.
Director Miller.
Sure, let me pile on just right where Rod left off, and then I have maybe a couple of specific thoughts on the letter that aren't wordsmithing, but more the tone. First off, the letter and where we are right now is sort of reactionary and defensive, and I agree with Rod. I actually think that we should launch some sort of offensive strategy. We should be telling the legislature, here's where we think you need to be guiding this for the good of our citizens. And that's an offensive move. Right now, we're in a response mode. I think that, I don't know how you do it, but CalCCA should wrap their head around if we could get the legislature to pass some stuff to make this better for us, what should it be? And I think that being on the defensive means that we're fighting for status quo, and I think we need to be fighting for a win. So outside of the letter, my suggestion is the CCA figure out an offensive prong to our strategy on dealing with the CPUC and the IOUs. As for the tone of the letter, I think there's a similar sort of theme, and I will just refer you to the last sentence of the first paragraph. It's a reactionary sentence. It's all about the Green Book, which is what the letter is. You've already said that it's fatally flawed. I think you could recraft that sentence in a way that would be sort of a positive reflection on what CCAs are bringing and how they should be supported. So rather than saying, if the Green Book goes forward, the life is over, I think that last sentence could say, we need to be supporting this bastion of innovation and creativity, which is bringing all these good things to
Driving down costs.
Exactly.
Supplying power
Support-
to this many customers.
Yeah, supporting the three goals, how we as CCAs are already doing that, and that we should be taking a perspective that enhances and encourages that. So you just, I know we're really trying to focus on the Green Book, but you already, I think, nailed it hard by you when you said alarmingly flawed. And then I think you could end, and I would love to see that in bold, by the way, those comments.
Red.
Yeah, red, underline, bold, italics. And can you make it blink on the paper while you're
Big
at it?
circle and an arrow to it.
Yeah, but I think the next sentence could be turned over in a way to be a very positive sentence that say CCAs are doing more than you can imagine for cost, for decarbonization. I mean, go through the goals, stated in a very positive thing as sort of this green thing is flawed. My job as a legislator, I should be supporting these CCAs. And maybe you have to stick a few facts in there that we're serving 10 million people in the state of California, and we've moved from PG&E, we've moved ourselves, 10 years forward on decarbonization, or some positive spin about who we are and why they should be supporting us. What we've done already.
Perhaps adding how much money we're putting back in the consumer's pocket to be dumped into the California economy.
Yeah, I mean, some positive thing. I think the last sentence was far too defensive and far too much playing to the Green Book is bad. And I think you nailed the Green Book with the alarmingly flawed. I don't know who came up with that. Brilliantly caustic. Sorry. I think the next sentence, in terms of our tone, you could find a way to land on a positive. And then when you look at the whole letter, I think the last paragraph could be refactored to land in a positive space to say you need to support all the goodness that we're bringing. And that's without wordsmithing. And just for reference, I'm happy to get this thing out this week. And here's my signature. Just tell me who I got to give it to.
All right. Director Renning.
Thank you. I'm agreeing. I guess I'm going to agree a lot with what Howard said. Yeah. When I've been paying attention to what's going on, a lot of, not just the Green Book, but the other things that have been coming out of the PUC, a lot of it is around this resource adequacy. And I think that they are seeing where the future is going. There's discussion at the legislature about we want to be completely decarbonized at some date in the future. And what does that mean for resource adequacy? That it's a bit scary. In today's world, how do you remove the carbon sources and still keep the grid reliable? And I'm suspecting that really what's behind it is the PUC is truly worried, okay, how do we make this happen? And they want control, and they're thinking, well, if I only have a few of the IOUs to work with, it's going to be easier to do this. But, what I was going to say is what you really need is the innovation. And a lot of these CCAs are bringing the innovation. We're all thinking differently. And for our grid to be reliable in a completely decarbonized world, we're really going to have to change the way things are done. This is what Howard was saying. What can we bring? And I'm really emphasizing that it's the way we thinking differently. It's the innovation. We are bought into all the same goals of reliability, affordability, decarbonization. But I really feel like this is the bottom, that they really are worried there. How are we going to get there? And let's throw away all this distracting stuff of the CCAs so we can somehow figure this out. But they've got it backwards because how fast have the IOUs moved on anything? If we really have a date of 2040 where we have to be completely decarbonized if De Leon's bill ever goes through, we're going to need a lot of innovation, and the CCAs are going to help with our idea of already talking about pump storage. That's the kind of things that we're going to need. So
Great.
I think I'm just supporting.
Director Smith, and then Director Abekoka. Sorry. Good.
I would actually like to cede my spot to Director Abekoka.
Okay.
Somebody that wasn't on the committee first, and then
Terrific, thank you. I appreciate the letter. I think it is well written. I was looking at this as, you know, this being directed to our legislators and what is important to them. And it was mentioned already. I think it would be helpful, and I'm thinking this will get sent before the Wednesday trip. But this could be used as sort of an introductory piece as well. And, you know, the legislators, like us, are accountable to our constituents, and we share the same constituents in most part. And so I just thought maybe that would be helpful with a little bit of background of, you know, what is SVCE? How many people do we serve? You know, why were we formed? It was because, frankly, our community was asking us to do this. And if we can maybe preface it with that introduction, to just, you know, kind of hit the point that these are your constituents who wanted this. And so, you know, I know they have the pressures of from other sources, but you know, we were in response to what our constituents are asking, and so we would ask legislators to, you know, do the same and honor that request that comes from our communities. And if we could add a little bit more of that, that might be maybe make it more interesting for the legislators, and just to remind them, you know, why this is important to us and to them. And that would just be my suggestion. Thanks.
Any other? Yeah, Director Smith.
Yeah, could well, before I get to my comments, I'd like to ask Director Abe-Koga for a clarification. Do you mean to put that in the letter, or do you mean to discuss it with them in person?
I thought it could maybe be included in this letter as the beginning, just a quick SVCE, you know, kind of a
1-year-old serves X number of customers.
Yes. We've had, you know, great
supported by the majority of the city councils in 13 cities and county.
Yes. I'm you know, assuming that most of them don't really know what this is, what we are yet, and so it'd be helpful to explain that, but really emphasize that these are, you know, the constituents who have asked us to come together. So.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying. I have agreed with the comments so far to speak as much as is possible to the benefits of Silicon Valley Clean Energy and other CCAs specifically. I wanted to also respond to the comment about recommending actions for legislators in this letter. I don't think that it's the time for that yet, because this is, I believe that Cal CCA, I don't think Hillary mentioned it, but Cal CCA is also working on how to respond, and it's maybe perhaps more in their role to vet some ideas. I will say that we did discuss some ideas, but they weren't really fully baked, and I don't feel that they're ready necessarily to make that kind of a recommendation. But I will disclose that we did discuss Appendix 3 quite a bit, and it's, you know, it's possible that something could come, some recommendations could come related to Appendix 3 of the Green Book, but I'm not sure that we're really ready to, first of all, make a legislative recommendation and then vet it through the board, you know, after the fact of this meeting. So and also, in conclusion, I did have a few diction questions that I relayed to staff with my reasons already, so they have my input about that. As a former professional writer and editor, it's like killing me not to like dig into this and do more with it, but it's not my, you know, it's my role to sign the thing and let other people wordsmith it. But I appreciate the work and the quick turnaround.
Are there any other comments? Yeah, Director Bruins.
Yes, please.
Oh, all right. How about we'll go to Director Gibbons first and then Director Bruins.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
discussion has been quite to the point. So I don't know where or how, but I would like to say that someplace it's important for the legislators to refer to the legislation that, and I'm not sure which one, but that established clean energy for CCAs, or the legislation about carbon emissions. I don't know if that Senate bill was 375 or whatever one it is. I like the idea of tying it to something specifically legislating, so that the legislature took action, and this is contrary to their existing action, where it's rolling everything backwards. I like somehow to tie it to what the legislature has already achieved, and how much CCAs are actually meeting, if not exceeding, the legislative goals, and the CPUC is kind of usurping that. And, excuse me. And then tying that back to a comment I think someone made earlier, why are they doing this? And I'll try and explain this. It seems to me that the letter needs to be clear to everybody as to why the CPUC thinks this is necessary. And if I heard the conversation correctly, it's because they're concerned about grid reliability and the changes from carbon-emitting fuels to non-carbon emitting fuels. So, to me, that would tie back to why we are in existence to begin with, and how much non-carbon emitting power sources has been created, built, and is being utilized since the CPAs have been in business, or in the recent years, whichever is the stronger point. And then emphasize how much, just like the video we just did, of how much carbon is not in the atmosphere because of it. So it seems to me that it could reinforce that the Green Book suggestions are totally contrary to the ultimate goal of the legislature, the higher good of the legislation, which is to decarbonize. So I don't know how to fit that in, but that's some thoughts, because decentralization is not the same as deregulation. It's competition that is doing innovation. So I think all of those are thoughts that as you tweak the letter, you might keep. And I would encourage engaging, if possible, President of the Board of Supervisors, Joe Midian, who was very active in the legislature at the time a lot of this legislation was done, along with our board member, Dave Cortese, to see if they had any thoughts on this, because certainly Supervisor Midian is extremely knowledgeable and might have an extra little thoughtful tweak.
Thank you, Director Gibbons. Director Bruins?
Okay, so first I'm going to disclose I have not read the Green Book, and nor had I read the letter before coming in here. So I guess, listening to the conversation, I'm not going to jump into the fray in terms of the wordsmithing. I guess I would just go back to a couple of principles. So first, I want to ask a question. They've published this Green Book, so what's the next step in this Green Book? This Green Book is out there, and what's next with it? Forget our role, just what is the next step with the Green Book?
So actually, go ahead.
So it's going to be, there's an opportunity for public comment, and then there's going to be a final version of this that is published after taking in stakeholder feedback. So there's an official CPUC timeline for that, and there are going to be more stakeholder engagement events, basically public forum events like the ones held last year through the end of this year. I would say there is not queued up any specific policy decision the way there would be in a regular proceeding. It's more of a stakeholder engagement process. But I think also we should consider the possibility that there will be legislation sometime before the end of this session that sort of references some of the questions asked in this book. So there's the timeline at the CPUC, and then the timeline for the ways this could echo through other policymaking agencies.
Okay, so given that, I guess what I would ask that when you look at all this feedback that you have is, first, make sure you've established a clear purpose of what this letter is intended to do. Is it purely a rebutting, the position that the CPUC has taken, or is it some rebuttal and a call for action? Again, depending on what that timeline is, I think in a lot of ways, as it's written right now, and I think that's what I'm hearing some of my colleagues say, it's really focused more on the rebutting it, okay? And again, if I were a legislator, if it's in a public review process, it would be, well, give your feedback to the CPUC, because what do you want me to do about it right now, right? So again, I think we should ask about that. And establish the purpose and make sure we use just enough words to get across the purpose that we're intending to. Long documents don't go anywhere, right? So you got to really have to kind of say it up front. So the structure of it. But in terms of, if we're looking at it in terms of a call for action, given the tone of our conversational here, we may want to have you guys start figuring out, are we looking at them to look at, maybe convening an advisory group or somebody to comment, to bring perspective or, before the legislative action. But think about, what is it you're asking the legislators? Otherwise, it's just a letter that says, okay, you had an opinion, next. So I think there needs to be a call for action. I'm not sure I support the idea of maybe an addendum, and maybe you do it as was suggested in terms of when you go up to visit the legislation and all, that fact sheet that kind of reminds people. But if you put too much of that into a letter, it puts us kind of sounding defensive versus the word that was used over there in terms of how do we get more on the offense. So I would caution that we don't sit there and make this about justifying our existence, because that doesn't, I'm not sure that's, it's really, it should be something that says how do we move forward. So those were kind of my general comments. I'm going to trust that those of you that are crafting this will do an excellent job of it. So, but just go back to your purpose. That really should be, and why is this body versus challenging or rebutting the facts of the CPUC. So what's going to get the legislators' attention? The recommendation by Member Gibbons, so Joe Simidian served in the state legislature. He served as a state, senator as well. And so he probably has a lens, and he used to serve he was on the board here, the founding. He probably can help bring a perspective or share his thoughts in terms of what makes a legislature pay attention, or it's, their staff to pay attention. So it may not be bad to put a call into him and talk with him a little bit about what's alarming us and how do we get their attention. Thank you.
I think if there's no other comments, I know Director Rennie would like to make some. I would like to wrap up what I've heard tonight, make sure I've articulated our comments to the staff, and we'll call it a day. So, okay, Director Tate. Let me let Director Rennie go first. He was queued up, and then you. How about that?
I'll be real quick.
Okay, terrific.
So Hillary, you said something I hadn't thought about, that there's going to be public comment on this, which includes CCA, Cal CCA probably, and so forth, and then they're going to make changes to it. But I'm assuming it's not like an EIR where you put everything in and then you respond to it. In fact, that's not correct, right? They don't put all the comments and then do response to them. They just make changes based on feedback they get.
Correct.
And so they can completely ignore input and not make much changes. They can put in whatever they want. Mm-hmm. So our letter is not what we would send to them in an effort to get them to make this sound more favorable to us, right? We would kind of craft something differently. And, is that a goal that is achievable to get them to make it sound more favorable. I realize this letter is now to quickly get to the legislators so that they don't take this, too much in the way it's written. But is our secondary goal to then hopefully get the update of this more favorable to, reality and to us? And are there certain things in our current letter to the legislature that might inhibit our ability to also influence this document?
That's a good point. So we are working on two timelines here. And basically the point being that the cycle for revision at the CPUC is slow enough that there will be several news cycles, and this will have sort of percolated through the legislature long before the final draft comes out. So you make a good point. We are going to be working on submitting public comments, pointing out many of the same fundamental issues that we're talking about in the letter at the CPUC. But thank you. It's good feedback to remember that you have multiple conversations happening simultaneously.
And Director Tate.
Yeah, just very quickly, when I first got the letter, I reacted similarly. I want to edit it and get it down because that's too long. It was contained in one page. And I'm just saying, what I've heard tonight, I don't disagree with any of the comments, but you're going to have to take stuff out to put stuff in, and that's going to make it even harder to get everybody's signature. So let's make it, I know that with our leader and our CEO, we'll get a good quality letter. We just need to kind of back off some of our things, because it can't all be in there and get a single page letter.
So here are the comments that I've heard tonight, and unless I say something that you just think is egregiously wrong or I've missed the mark, you don't feel like you need to weigh in again. First, I assume that we as SVCE and as part of CalCCA plan to respond directly to the Green Book and to the CPUC as appropriate when the opportunity presents itself, and to refute whatever information they've decided to publish in that report. Secondly, as far as this individual letter goes, the feedback I've heard from directors is to add some positivity to the letter about the things that SVCE does do, particularly that to remind the legislators that that CCAs were founded based on the actions legislators have already taken, and that this report is contrary to that. That throughout the letter there may be places where you feel like bold or italics may be appropriate to highlight and, in fact, punctuate what your message is, and that, in fact, while we all agree more background on SVCE would be ideal, we don't want the document to become too lengthy or long, and that perhaps a fact sheet about SVCE could be added as a cover letter, or certainly used as next week as the team goes forth to this legislative day. Yeah, so a separate sheet. Did I pretty much capture everybody's thoughts here? Or did anything get left out that you feel strongly about? Okay. Director Gibbons, anything from you? Okay. Okay, then the last direction that the board has given is, if possible, get Supervisor Simitian's eyes on it, if possible. I don't want to hold it up if he is traveling or unavailable, and I feel like we've got enough bright people here working on this to get it out. So with that, I'd like to just make sure one last time that the direction is to produce this letter. You understand the process. It will be coming to you. Your response needs to be timely back, saying either I agree with it, or it looks fine to me, or here are the specific edits I want to see in it before I'm willing to put my name on it. Once the edits are then culled and put together, one final draft will be sent to each of you. You will see it one last time, and it will have your signature added to it with your final approval. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm getting head nods.
City seal, is that okay?
And the city seal, we're going to add the city seal.
If
So,
possible.
yes.
If I may make some.
Yes, please.
So before you leave today, if Hillary hasn't already, we'll provide you a sheet of paper for you to sign. So it'll be ready for you if you agree with the letter, we'll have a JPEG of that with the city seal.
Most of us have done that, I think. If you haven't, please make sure you do before you leave. And Director Gibbons will figure out how to get that done for you as well.
Okay. So I wanted to just address a couple of issues in addition to what you just
Please.
summarized. So in terms of the value of this letter, speed is of the essence. Because right now, this Green Book is probably being shot at the legislature. So I would say 2/3 to 3/4 of this is it is a rebuttal document. It's basically saying, pointing out the flaws and the assumptions of that. So it is defensive by nature. It's so that any moves made in the legislature to add some control over us, legislators are aware of. So I think speed, and it is by design about at least 2/3 going to be defensive. We will have many opportunities using a variety of tactics outside of just SVCE. It's going to be CalCCA and using some other tools to advocate our interests that I heard today. So there'll be multiple opportunities and multiple tactics to do that. So given that, I'll take all the input that was summarized by Chair Corrigan in developing that next draft for you very shortly.
Terrific. With that, I'm going to adjourn tonight's meeting, but just add one reminder.
No, we need to make a motion to
we do.
approve what you just
So
reviewed.
sorry. I thought we were just giving direction to move forward and that the approval from each director individually would serve as their approval of the letter. Do you need a motion tonight?
I think the direction is pretty clear, so I don't know that there really is a need for a motion at this point in time.
Well, we
other-
agendize this to take action.
Well, only thing, maybe the one thing to be clear on is that you are directing that this letter be sent or be prepared. So I would make that motion with the process that we've agreed upon.
I will make that motion and with all the ideas that have been provided as summarized by the chair this evening, that we get it out no later than early next week with whoever is willing to review and sign, but in an expeditious process. I mean, I think this will be a very important vehicle for us to communicate with as we head up to Sacramento.
Second.
Yes, Director Smith.
Could I add a friendly amendment to authorize the chair to work with the director to finalize the letter upon review?
Yeah, that is the recommendation.
Yes.
It's part of it? Okay.
Yes, it is.
All right.
The chair, what were you trying to say?
Just to give the.
Oh, yeah. I think we want to give the chair and the CEO latitude to take whatever remarks we have tonight to expeditiously finish the letter.
Terrific.
And submit to us for a final yes.
Point of clarification, in terms of the list that, the chair listed, is the expectation that all of those comments are going to be incorporated, or is the expectation is that's what we are giving to the CEO and the chair so they can align any suggestions with the actual intent of the letter? So that way, because I'm afraid if we have the wrong expectation, okay, and everyone's expecting, or people up here, some of us are expecting certain things to be in there and they're not, I don't want that to start us down a spiral. So I'm hoping that the motion actually says consideration is being given to those items, not necessarily inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I would like to give wide latitude to the
Thank you.
CEO and the chair to come up with a final draft. And given the time we have to do this, I'm hoping that every one of us up here will agree to sign it, even though, there are additional points to make. I think Girish's statements are well taken. This Green Book has been out for 3 business days, 4?
Came out like on the 3rd? 6 days. Oh, yeah, business days. You're right.
Okay, so, this doesn't have to be the definitive end-all communication. We simply want a piece to take. We want a fact sheet to take that, independent of our issues with the Green Book, right, communicates the value proposition that we brought and the innovation we're providing, right? The idea that we're working on these contracts to really not just push the noodle, but move the needle, right? As you've said. And then, so.
If there's no further discussion,
Thanks.
we have a motion and a second. Can we call for the vote, or is there any other last-minute comments? Please.
Director Grilly? Aye. Director Tate? Aye. Director Smith? Aye. Director Miller? Aye. Director Sinks?
Aye.
Director Rennie?
Aye.
Chair Corrigan?
Yes.
Vice Chair Abikoga? Aye. Director Harney?
Aye.
Director Bruins? Aye. Director Craig?
Aye.
Director Gibbons?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries with Director Cortese absent.
Told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero.